Today on the Bumper to Bumper Roadmap, transmissions. How to handle your transmission. I've heard this, and I have no idea where the statistic comes from, but the average person will buy a transmission every 7.5 years. Transmissions fail 4-to-1 over engines. We can change our engine oil, and we do often, yet we neglect our transmission, and people tell us we don't have to service our transmission. Lee, do you service your transmission, or do you neglect it?
You know what? Now I'm a servicer and I'm a believer in it. But, there was a time when I was a little bit younger that I did neglect my transmission. I assumed just, even in the business, that I would just get in the car and I would drive and it would take me where I wanted to go. And just how magically that, I would never be burning up that fluid or anything else. So I've been on both sides of that fence, Dave.
Well, Keith, you've been in the transmission business for 18 years now, and transmission service. There's so much bad information out there about transmission service. What have you found?
I found it's better to be proactive and change the oil as often as you possibly can, usually at least once a year. And I'm a living witness with my vehicles. It really helps out to give them a good fresh drink of oil.
Well, here's the thing that people probably don't realize if you haven't bought a transmission in the last 7.5 years or maybe the last 15 years because you've been one of the lucky ones. Transmissions have doubled in price. They've got their full electronics now. We used to have 2-speed transmissions, 3-speed transmissions. Now we've got 9-speed transmissions. Don't you think that thing wants a nice, cool, fresh drink of fresh transmission fluid? Or do you believe what the manufacturer tells you? Not to worry about it. It'll take care of itself. Ken, you've been rebuilding transmissions for 30 years. When you take them apart, can you tell the difference in a transmission that's been serviced versus one that hasn't?
Oh, yeah, definitely. You can tell right away. And sometimes you can tell just by checking dipstick oil or anything. And I think that's part of the problem with the new cars is that some people find out, they open up their hood, there's no dipstick anymore. So they figure, oh, I don't have to worry about it, and they just leave it at that.
Out of sight, out of mind, no dipstick to check. And we had someone in the other day just complaining because there was no dipstick on their car. And it's a process to change or check transmission fluid anymore. Got to drive the thing, get it warm, get it up in the air, take a plug off, maybe look at the temperature of the transmission on a scanner to see what it is. So go ahead, Lee.
Well, I think it's something should be noted is that it can be a little bit confusing for the consumer out there now. Is because with the manufacturers, they're extending their service intervals for transmissions, alluding us to believe that we can go 100,000, 150,000 without having, to interact or change these fluids. And ultimately, that really is not the case. And we know that especially out here with the heat that we have in Arizona in particular, that is, just like Keith said earlier, a good fresh drink of oil, it will go a long way in helping us prolong the life of our unit.
Well, I think the point there with the manufacturers and for the consumer, I do believe you're confused, and I talk to people every day that have a million questions about transmission service. And if you have questions with transmission service, give us a call. We're happy to answer. If you got questions about anything in relation to the automobile, don't hesitate. But the manufacturer wants to pretend. There was a commercial I saw, and there was a picture of a Toyota transmission, and they stacked 9 bottles of fluid in front of it. And there was a picture of a General Motors transmission. They stacked 70 bottles of fluid in it. And I thought to myself, and their point was that we're green, and Toyota's really made that with the Prius, and we're green, and they show a picture of a car being made out of the wilderness. But their point there is we're green. And I look at that and I say, those transmissions really have the same technology. Why does Toyota's last longer than General Motors, or needs less service than General Motors? Well, it's just simply, they just said, you don't have to service it like we used to. And everyone's changed that expectation, but what is their motive? They're in the business of selling cars primarily. So if the car doesn't last, you go buy another one. If they can't sell you another car, what do they get to sell you? They get to sell you parts.
More parts, yeah.
So anyway, I think the consumer, you got to be aware of that. There's some manufacturer recommendations that I absolutely believe in, and there's some manufacturer recommendations that I just think are smoke and mirrors, and that's one of them because I want that CAFE rating.
Well, I like you said, Dave, really you have to look at the motives, the manufacturers, because this manual that they sell us that says, well, you can go this interval between services basically is utilized as a sales manual so that they can pre-sell their vehicles and so that we can look at what cost of ownership is. For anybody that really wants to take care of their vehicle, I think it's important that when they get with their technician that they find out and interact a little bit. Say, what is your intent for your car, and how long would you like to keep it? What's your expectation? And then really build that relationship with your technician so that you can get a game plan. Keith spoke about it earlier. You can choose to be proactive, which is where you're going to get a game plan, you're going to build it, you're going to put it together so that every year or every year and a half, every 30,000 miles, I'm going to be doing my transmission service, I'm going to do my fluid exchange, I'm going to get a filter, and I'm going to get that thing so that I can have it last me for 100, 200, or 250,000 miles.
And I think it's important for the public to really know that you have to be suspect of what the manufacturer is trying to really say with don't service your transmission, because there might be something else, and you really owe it to yourself to at least get your transmission fluid checked out annually to see, hey, is this really able to go the distance that the manufacturer says? You owe it to yourself, especially with that kind of an investment.
Absolutely.
Well, I literally got a piece of information from ZF, the transmission manufacturer, the guys that build these things, and they put their transmissions in Fords, they put them in BMWs, they put them in Volkswagens. And BMW is a brand, I think, of that little green sticker on the transmission pan that says lifetime fill. And, the bulletin from ZF literally says that's just not true. They took something we designed, and they made it fit their marketing, not what we designed. I mean, they built the thing, they designed it. They're brilliant transmissions. I mean, there's a lot going on. It's my belief that the modern transmission fails for an internal hydraulic leak, and that internal hydraulic leak starts at the valve body. So in a valve body, there literally is a dozen valves that are doing all kinds of crazy things, running different directions, and it's a very, very tight between the valve and the sleeve. And if you don't have clean fluid in there, you got to replace it. We did a valve body in a BMW, and I'm a little embarrassed to say it over the air, but it was just that expensive for ZF. It was a $4,000 valve body. The guy was happy because it was cheaper than the $9,000 transmission, but I like to think that could have been prevented if he didn't wait till 80,000 miles. We only serviced the transmission because we had to replace the valve body. Why did he wait that long?
Well, there's there's no real. He probably waited that long because he understood that, the manufacturer's confusing him, telling him that he can wait that long, and it's lifetime. By doing so, ran into a problem and an issue like you're talking about. But the most beautiful thing that we have is we have control. As a consumer and the owner of our vehicles, you said in the beginning of the show, transmission. I'm going to tell you maintenance. Maintenance is more essential than ever before, particularly with the fluids and the things that, cars are being built. They're being built better. And, the modern transmission truly is a marvel, if you look at the things.
Absolutely.
But heat is the one thing that breaks everything down, whether it's the human body or the automobile or anything else in between. Heat is what tears it down, and fluid is susceptible to heat. And so when we go through and we become, like I say, proactive, because unfortunately, the gentleman you're talking about, he was a little bit reactive, wasn't he? $4,000.
Definitely $4,000 reactive. And I think the point here is that, you buy this car, you may, whether you plan on keeping it for 100,000 miles or 200,000 miles, either way, service that transmission so you just don't have to buy one. I mean, I would love to buy one because I sell them, but at the same time, really, you can prevent a lot of that stuff. We'd rather just service it and take care of you and have a smile when you leave, because you're not buying something big and bad and ugly, and no one wants transmission issues.
Yeah, but Dave, knowing you, I mean, you would probably much rather see your customers coming back and being very proactive, doing their transmission services, than selling them a unit.
Absolutely.
Lot easier for you, to be really an advocate for the consumer, helping them to understand that they've just got to change their thought process just a little bit, and just change it to the point where, okay, I'm going to be a little bit more proactive with my vehicle. I'm going to expect it to give me a little more out of it, So there should be an expectation equated with it. But I'm going to do that with a plan of action, with my guy, with my technician, my mechanic. And I'm going to get in, I'm going to talk to him and tell him, hey, I'd like to do this. Can you help me get there? And you know what? All the bumper-to-bumper guys are going to be more than happy to sit down with their customers and help them get to what they'd like to see.
Up first this segment, we're going to go with Bill in Peoria with a transmission question. Go ahead, Bill. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
I have two questions, actually. When you change your oil, should you also change your filter every time? And my other question, is there any manufacturer whose transmission is better than the other?
I would say, and I'm going to let the builders maybe follow this up, but for your first question, We love to change the filter. We do a traditional pan-off service. We remove the transmission pan. One of the things we get to do when we change that filter is dissect it to find out if there's anything negative going on in the inside of the transmission. And I think you as the consumer, you want to know what's going on with the transmission if you're starting to have problems, if you're starting to have issues. So go ahead, Keith.
Yes, as a transmission builder, I definitely want to know what's happening with that filter because it really gives me a lot of information as to the health and what's actually occurred in that vehicle to let me know if there's something coming apart. And sometimes it doesn't all end up in the bottom of the pan, and it gets caught in the filter. That means the filter is doing its job, of course. But without that information, then I can't make an accurate determination of whether we should service your vehicle or not.
Go ahead, Lee.
And just so you know, there are some vehicles that don't have pans and they don't have filters that are serviceable. So it all depends on the type of unit, but I would think that we would all be in accordance that if the unit does come with a filter, it's generally a great recommendation to service that filter each and every time you do a fluid exchange.
And this is the one thing that I forgot to mention is that filters, as transmissions wear and clutch debris comes apart and ends up in that filter really starts to plug off. That filter is the inlet to the pump. The pump is the hydraulic heart of the transmission. So as that filter starts to restrict, it drags down your line pressure in your transmission, and therefore it's going to lower the life expectancy of the transmission. So absolutely change the filter. Some people believe, hey, we'll do it every other time. Flush it one time, change the filter the next time with a pan-off service. There's different ways, but that's something you can work out with your shop that you have a relationship with that we preach about here at Bumper to Bumper Radio. And go ahead, Ken.
I was just going to say, related to his other question, which transmission fails least compared to others? Being in the business for 30 years, I don't think it really matters. It's a numbers game sometimes. You know, there's millions and millions of Dodge Caravans out there. So one week you may get all Dodge Caravans, and then the next week you may get a Toyota Tranny. And it really doesn't matter. It's hard to say I'm going to buy a car because that transmission is never at a transmission shop. It just doesn't work that way.
That's a good point, and I would think they all make good ones and they all make bad ones. I've seen Toyota transmissions that I'm not impressed with, and then I've seen some Toyota transmissions that don't make anymore that were just fantastic, and they never went out. And they change over the years. You know, one year you've got a good Toyota transmission, one year you don't, and it just depends on the design, and the designs change over the years. So don't pick a car based on transmission necessarily. You know, I have a little bit of a pet peeve with CVT transmissions. I'm not a big fan. I think they're disposable transmissions, so don't like them. But other than that, thanks for the call. We're going to go with Jerry in Chandler with a transmission question. Go ahead, Jerry. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Hi, this is Jerry.
Go ahead, Jerry.
I've got a 2000 Ford Ranger that I just purchased from my father-in-law. It's got 96,000 miles on it. It's just suddenly decided that it's going to shift very hard from first to second gear. Took it back to the shop that he has traded with forever. It's a very reliable shop in Chandler, and they say it needs a transmission. My question is, I am more inclined to try replacing the fluid and filter first and see if that'll take care of the problem. Am I just wasting my time and money doing that, or do I really need a transmission?
I don't like either of those two answers, to be quite frank with you. 4R44E is the transmission in that vehicle. It's the same transmission they use in a Ford Explorer many times. Ford Rangers are so light, I see those transmissions often go 200,000 miles. So it's only halfway through its life period. The very fact that it has a hard 1-2 shift doesn't mean the transmission's bad. It could by all means, but it needs to be diagnosed. Don't just go throwing a fluid change at it. It needs to be diagnosed. A lot of times we have a 4R44E on a Ranger 2000 roughly, Ken, in our shop right now, and we suspect a blown valve body gasket. Such a common problem. So, and the other thing that happens on Fords, if there's any sort of code, diagnostic trouble code stored, what it does was actually the computer will elevate the pressure, the line pressure in the transmission. So it opens up that valve, and it's full pressure. All the shifts are going to feel hard. The 1-2 shift always feels the hardest, and the reason being is that's when inertia is the greatest. That's when you have the biggest change in RPM, and you're going from a stop to, once you're going third gear, I mean, the car's already going 35 miles an hour. There's not a lot going on there, and by the time you hit fourth gear, I mean, it just rolls right into fourth. Ken?
No, I agree. And kind of something I've been thinking about this last week, because I've been seeing a lot of it lately, is that a lot of people will bring their car in saying that the car has been somewhere else. Someone told them the transmission needs to be replaced. They brought it to a shop that maybe pulled codes on it, but they've erased the codes, and now everything's okay. Because like you said, line pressure gets elevated a little bit. The problem I'm having as a diagnostic guy is figuring out what codes were in there. So we need to not let them clear the codes and leave them in there and just re-diagnose the car completely.
During the break, Lee was talking about specialty and the things that these guys do, because we see it so many times. Go ahead.
Yeah, Dave, it's transmissions, like we talked about, they can be an expensive proposition. And when you're looking at, the expenditure that goes along with that, I think it's vital to really understand. You mentioned before you didn't like either one of the two options for Jerry. And diagnosis is what you put forward. And I will tell you, I just think that's absolutely wonderful. And as we sit down and talk about it, we do everything in our shop. And we also do transmission. We have problems that overwhelm us. We go to you.
Call us.
That's right. And we do that specifically so that we don't have to push forward something that may or may not be necessary. We want to make sure, there's a little cost that's equated to it with it. But I can tell you, just like we went to back in the beginning of the show, that gentleman that spent $4,000, his other proposition was to spend $9,000 and overhaul. Both would have fixed it. Both would have fixed it. But you know what? I want my customer to be able to get the benefit of the doubt, to be able to keep the dollars in their pocket, and therefore it makes way more sense to take it and go to the next step. That should be the automatic role of each of the shops. Just go to the next level. If you don't have the ability or capability of doing the complete evaluation or diagnostics, you know what? You guys are specialists in what you do. We can always come to you and say, hey, listen, we need this, and certainly for a price and for a fee. Guess what? It generally winds up saving the consumers thousands of dollars.
Thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Keith.
And Lee made a very important point. One of the biggest things that I harp on is I don't want somebody that doesn't know about a transmission to make a recommendation, because that really scares the customers half to death. Just like I don't want my primary care physician telling me I need open heart surgery and they didn't check me out completely. So yeah, it is necessary to get a thorough diagnosis. Check the computer for sure, because the computer's been with the vehicle the whole time. Records a lot of information, and we need to know all of that information to make an accurate assessment of what way the customer needs to go with their problem.
Well, I like what Lee said, and I think technicians, we're all borderline arrogant, but we like to think we know what we're doing. But he mentioned that he knew his limitations. There's some things, hey, we can take care of this, not a big deal. And when they're over their head, they have a good relationship. So we talk about relationships with shops as a consumer. Shop to shop, we have good relationships in order to take care of our customer. You'll find that at all the bumper shops, we all talk, we all communicate. There's a lot of shops that are generalists in our network that when they've got a transmission issue, they call me up, they say, hey, we got this and this. What do you think? Are we on the right path? And I appreciate that they're willing to do that versus sell something somebody they don't need. And we talked about the 1870 code during the break, and the definition of the code, it's a diagnostic trouble code, and it says 1870, and it says right behind it, transmission components slipping. And the gentleman that came from Goodyear to see us last week that we were talking about before the break, all we had to do was slip a valve in the valve body to fix it. But those transmissions are replaced on a regular basis from people who don't know any better. Okay? I mean, they say, oh, the transmission's slipping. It must be bad. Wait a minute. Transmissions, they are twice as expensive, but in my estimation, they last twice as long with good service. We have this preconceived notion out there that transmissions are only good for 100,000 miles. And it's not true anymore. I mean, they cost twice as much, but a transmission, if you can get 200,000 miles out of it, Lee, you mentioned that that's what you got out of this last transmission. First go around, you got 100,000.
Yeah.
Second go around, you got 200,000 miles out of it.
Yep.
But that's when you started servicing it because you didn't like buying it the first time.
That's it.
So anyway.
The difference in proactive and reactive.
Up first this segment, we are going to go with Tom in Phoenix on a transmission question. Go ahead, Tom. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Thank you, Dave.
You bet.
I have a 2001 Dodge pickup, not a four-wheel drive. But when I'm driving down the freeway and I'm in high gear, that's fifth gear, it'll slide right out into fourth.
Is this this is an automatic transmission?
No, it's standard.
Manual transmission. And it pops,
Six-cylinder.
Six-cylinder. And it pops out of fifth?
Yeah, it just slides right out. So sometimes I have to just kind of hold it in high gear.
hold it in a high gear. Go ahead, Lee.
Tom, it sounds about how many miles do you have on that vehicle, Tom?
200.
About 200K. It's possible. There's synchronizers and synchronizer gears that are in that unit, and the synchronizer may be worn, and that's kind of the mechanism that would hold that into place, into gear. So you have a first, a second, third, fourth, fifth, and in this case a sixth gear, where it would hold it into place. And that synchronizer probably is just worn down. It's generally made out of brass or a material that's softer, metal, something of that nature. And when they wear, this is usually one of the complaints that we would hear, is that, it'll slip out of gear. I'll be driving. In some cases, you may accelerate a little bit too quickly, trying to pass or something, and all of a sudden it'll pop it. Basically, it neutrals. Is that what it does, Tom? It neutrals back out, and you got to kind of pop it back up into gear?
Well, yeah, I think it's going into neutral versus coming out of sixth gear. And one of the things we do, Tom, and it's a good question, when we check in transmissions, is that we sit there, put it in first gear, and we hit the gas and let off the gas quickly. Hit the gas, let off the gas quickly, and we're trying to get it to pop out of gear to see if there's an issue with that gear. And then we'll do that in second gear, third gear, fourth gear, fifth gear, sixth gear, and we're looking for it to pop out. But we load the drivetrain hard, and we let our foot off the gas real quickly to see if it pops out. Now, one of the things, and Lee's right as far as synchros, the way synchros work is they stop the gear. The transmission actually has to stop to slide into the next gear, and synchros help to do that, and they can wear out over time as far as that function of stopping the gear. But the other thing that I see on a lot of these Chryslers with these transmissions, they have shifter assemblies that like to wear out, and it's literally the forks and assemblies right on the top of the transmission that can sometimes be repaired without a major transmission and overhaul. That has a lot of miles on it, 200,000 miles, but I do see standards go a long time, but more so we see issues with shifter mechanisms going bad. So we are going to go with Jesse. I'm not sure what he's looking for because they're not telling me, but go ahead, Jesse. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Hi, yes, I have a couple questions on two of my vehicles. My first one is a 2001 Honda Civic. It's an automatic with 234,000 miles. It's when you start driving it, you have to kind of like hit the gas just right, and if you don't before it shifts, it'll kind of give you a clunk. But once it gets going, it shifts all the other gears. It seems like smoothly.
Is this
You know what that could be?
just first thing in the morning?
No, it's constant and hasn't changed.
Ken, any thoughts come to mind?
Other than, are there any check engine lights on, something like that?
No, there's not. And I got the car when I was 18 5 years ago, so I never serviced the transmission or never changed the fluid or anything. So I thought maybe the neglect on it made it go bad.
We promise not to scold you, but one of the things I think about on front-wheel drive cars is engine mounts. In engine mounts, there's a total of 4 of them on that car, one in front of the transmission and engine below the radiator, one on the firewall, which is down where your feet are, and the engine and transmission connect right there. And those two mounts in particular, you're going to get a lot of floppiness to the engine and transmission. So a lot of times people coming in think they have a major transmission problem. Well, it may just be a matter of mounts. So again, back to the other guy's question, we got to diagnose it to find out what's wrong with it. And 230,000 miles on a Honda is a lot of miles. On a Civic, I expect the transmission to last that long because they're light cars and they do relatively well. But what I really want you to do on that Honda is service the heck out of that fluid. I mean, you may never buy a transmission for that car if you're servicing it.
And Jesse, it's time. This is Lee, and it's time to service that fluid. Just on the sheer fact that it hasn't been done in 5 years, you're going to want to have someone take a look at the fluid, make sure. Honda's, that particular year, is one of those transmissions we discussed earlier. It doesn't have a pan, and it doesn't have a filter that you can service. There is one internally, but you have to disassemble it completely in order to be able to get to that. But I would tell you, just like Dave said, you're going to want to have the mounts checked really closely. Pretty common problem for those. But just in the simple fact that it's been 5 years since you've done some servicing with 231K, it can last and go a lot further. Get some fresh fluid in there. Give it a fresh drink.
Well, this is a topic that Ken and I have been talking a lot about lately. We had a call from a guy named Doug last week on a Lexus, and he said, when I'm coasting up to a stoplight, the light turns green, and I get back in the gas, man, it shifts really hard, and it feels like it's hunting for gears. In my diagnosis over the phone which I don't like to do, but it was that it had a bad pressure regulator valve. Well, Doug ended up bringing it in, and I said, give us a lot of time with it. We need some time with it because it was a Lexus with 80,000 miles on it, U240 transmission, and it was a two-step fix. Number one was to reprogram the computer, because what the manufacturers recognize is as the transmission wears, it develops bad habits. Well, guess what? They can fix that with programming. Mm-hmm. So the first thing we did was reprogram the computer. So we bought the software from Toyota, plugged it into his car, reprogrammed it, took care of that awkward, we call that a coasting down shift is what that is. And it got rid of the hunting that was going on. And then a second concern, there was a buzzing noise in the transmission, especially when cold. And you know what that was? That was a pressure regulator valve that I thought from the beginning. So we went ahead and we changed that pressure regulator valve. So the question that I asked you, and because transmissions now last for 200,000 miles, not 100,000 miles as people used to believe in, I mean, fluids are getting better. If you're changing them, it's going to last. But do we repair the transmission? Do we replace the transmission, or do we just simply reprogram the transmission? And that's the first thing Ken does when he's looking at a car is, hey, what's going on? Is there any bulletins about this thing? Is there any information? Maybe you can fill us in more on that, Ken.
Right. Well, I mean, that's a good thing about doing just transmissions is that I have access to all kinds of technical service bulletins for whatever make and model. So one of the first things I look at, especially if the car is less than 10 years old, I'll jump right on the internet and go to our sources, and then I can check and make sure that there's not a bulletin for a reflash. Even sometimes when the manufacturer sets up the vehicle originally, the specifications they put into the computers, the parameters are just way too tight. And sometimes you'll even get a check engine light or a code, and it can be for an engine problem, it could be for a transmission problem. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really matter. But a lot of people don't know that if your car is newer than 1996, you don't always have to replace the transmission or the computer. They can actually go in there and update it just like you would your home computer. You can put all new parameters in it and make it shift and drive like brand new.
It's a whole lot different than the old days. The old days we had widgets and springs and things that we changed and adjust. That's all gone now. Now we're looking at software, and valve bodies are a huge issue, and that's where the fluid conversation is such a big deal because they tell you don't have to service it. But I'm here to tell you, folks, those valves are sliding back and forth. They're very busy. In the old days, the solenoids turned on and off and valves turned on and off. Now everything is pulse width modulated. So I call them little buzzing valves. They're constantly walking a fine line back and forth, and it's adapting to your driving habits. We're going to go to Susan in Phoenix on an 07 Hyundai Elantra. Go ahead, Susan. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio.
Hi. Thanks, guys. What I'm wondering, and this does involve the transmission, but it involves car care in general, is who do I trust? I've got the dealership saying I need this checked out while I'm getting my oil change. I need to check the transmission fluid is this color or this other fluid is this color. My husband wants me to go to a private person to have it checked out that he trusts more. And when I ask my husband says, no, we're not spending that kind of money. You don't need it. Who do you trust?
Well,
who do you believe that says you need this done? A private person, my dealership who sold me the car, or your husband who might be just being a little cheap?
Susan, I certainly hope your husband is not listening. If he is, I can refer you to some good counseling. But boy, Lee over here is just like, I can't wait to talk about this. And it's a great question. And we can't, as consumers, we can't pretend that taking care of our car is free. These things need maintenance. You wouldn't, buy a nice car and park it in the ocean. It's going to ruin it. It's got to be taken care of. And then who do you trust? Well, I certainly have a great idea for that. That's bumpertobumperradio.com. There's a list of fine independent shops. But one of the things you talked about, do I go to the dealership? Do I go to an independent shop? And I'm not going to pick on anybody, but sometimes people think just because I'm at the dealership, I'm safe. And people think just because I'm at an independent, I'm safe. And you know what? Neither of those are true. It's you have to go be dealing with a good shop who's honest, who you have a relationship, And who's going to tell you? And you're going to have to, as a woman, you're going to have to use a little bit of your intuition to say, are these honest guys that are taking care of me? And I think of Lease Shop because they are so relational with their customers. They want to get to know them. They want to send them, cards, and they want cookies also at Christmas time from their customers. So, I mean, Lee, maybe you can fill in a little bit more on that.
Yeah, Susan, you're in the same situation that every other person that owns a car is, and it's always a little difficult because it's somewhat of a balancing act. But the question is fabulous, and that is, who do you trust? And all I can tell you is trust has to be given first. It can't be earned. Trust is one of those things that you have to get in and feel comfortable with a shop. I just like Dave, I'm going to echo his sentiments, and that is, I can give you a good place to start, and that is, just go onto Bumper to Bumper Radio and look at any one of the shops there, and I can tell you from experience, having worked with most of those owners, I would trust any one of them. But that's me. How do you find out for yourself? There's a pretty simple process. Nowadays everybody's got a computer they walk around with in their phone and everything else. You can go online and you can check out Better Business Bureau ratings. You can check out reviews and what other people are saying about them. And then, what I'm going to tell you to do, the most important thing is take it into one of these shops and sit down with them and have a discussion, have a conversation very openly, just as candid as you were here in asking the question, and tell them that, you are a little bit nervous, a little bit intimidated by the fact that you don't know who you can trust. Get them on your side so that you can really get an evaluation. And then don't be afraid to get a second and third opinion. When we have customers come in for the first time and they have to have a big buying decision, because let's face it, cars are a big buying decision. When they're a big buying decision, we encourage that, talk about it with the powers that be, with your husband and those who are going to have to be, pulling the string on making the investment, and then factor it out. How long do I want to keep the car? Is it safety related? I mean, it's very simple. You can have it broken down for you so that you can interpret what, the report says. And that's exactly what we do, or any of the quality shops at Bumper to Bumper. They're going to get in and they're going to talk with you, help you understand what's priority, what can wait, and then what you really, really need to do now. And most of the time, that's going to be stuff that's related to safety. So, fantastic question, Susan.
But with the one other point I wanted to make, there's two forms of service writers. The guy who's just a salesman, and he's going to sell you everything under the sun, and that's the way they do it. And then the other side of the spectrum, there's the guy who wants to be everybody's friend, doesn't want to charge you for auto repair. He doesn't want to have to see you spend money, because we have a conscience on our end. We don't want to have to see our consumers spend their hard-earned money. And because of that, we tend to not recommend all the things that they do need. So you have both ends of the spectrum. And when you have the relationship and he trusts you as a customer and you trust him as a shop, now you guys can make a decision, and we're not at two ends of the spectrum, one or the other. There's some gray in the middle and a whole lot of color. So really recommend you get that relationship started. So we're going to go to Sam in Phoenix with a transmission question. Go ahead, Sam. You're on Bumper to Bumper Radio. Doing good.
Good. Hey, I've got a 2004 Ford Expedition Eddie Bauer 4-wheel drive. It's got about, I would say, 245,000 miles on it, the original transmission. So I took it into a shop because there was an issue with the check engine light. They serviced it, and I guess it was just some vacuum lines on the top of the engine. So they gave it back to me. I drove it back to the house, and in the morning, I parked it. In the morning, my wife woke up and tried to move it, and it would move like 3 inches and then stop in reverse. And then she tried to pull forward, and it would move like 3 inches and forward and stop. It would just like something was stopping, almost like a block under the tire.
So, Sam, you said you did get the transmission service where you were in there getting that repair?
No, I was just getting it repaired because the check engine light came on.
Okay.
And it started kind of smelling funny, and I guess there was some vacuum lines that had come apart on the engine itself.
Long story short, so basically you got a major transmission problem now?
No, I think I do, but here's the catch, though. To make a long story short, so I drove home. In order to move the car, I kind of floored it, and it went tunk, 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 tunk. You know what I mean? And then I stopped it. I'm like, oh, geez, that didn't sound good. So then the tow truck got there, and it kind of chunked it down the driveway, and I put it in drive to get it up to where the flatbed tow truck was. Anyway, they loaded it on there, and I went to the shop, and there's no problem with the transmission. I'm driving it right now.
Hey, Sam, what I'm going to do, because we're running up against time and I want to answer your question, I'm going to put you on hold, and I'm going to finish up here after the show with you.